Thank you, everyone, for joining me in this last session this week at Microsoft Ignite. How was the week? Glad to hear, glad to hear. So before we get started, I want to quickly set expectations here. If you are a security expert, expect this to be a level 200 session, not a deep dive. Okay, so if anyone is a security expert here, feel free to go to another session. I won't be offended. Okay? This session is really here to close the gap for the specialists, the infrastructure architects, consultants, etc., that maybe lack the ability to carry that conversation about security with all the security experts from a customer side. Okay? Developers, etc. What I want to do here is make sure you guys understand these key concepts about encryption, certificates, and PKI. Okay? So with that said, let's get started. So why am I here today? Thank you to the NSA. Cryptography has become very mainstream now. Okay? There's been a lot of debates about backdoor access. Again, debates ongoing right now about having front door access to specific data held by private corporations, etc. So it's very mainstream. We see it in newspapers being brought up. We see it on websites everywhere. Okay? Privacy. We're going to talk about privacy here today. You know, what's being implicated these days in terms of privacy, and then how we're going to go ahead and provide privacy for our customers and for your own environment. Again, Edward Snowden. Thank you to Edward Snowden. Cryptography has become, again, very mainstream. Prevent leakage. So in terms of leakage, due to Edward Snowden, we now know that, hey, our documents need to be protected. We can't have this leakage being occurring within our network. And of course, when we're looking at our infrastructure, SharePoint, Exchange, Link, our infrastructures need to be kept secure and prevent these types of attacks from occurring on our networks. So why else am I here? Has anyone seen this before? Quite a few of you. I think every engagement that I go to, whenever I go to customer sites and we have implementation occurring, I think I see this pop up every time. What about this? Have you guys seen this before? Of course you have. Again, like the remote desktop connection, we see this all the time as well with the web browser. Okay? So I'm hoping from this session, you're going to now understand why this is occurring and how you can prevent this from occurring. And if it does occur, you actually know it to be an issue. Okay. So server authentication. This is actually server authentication failing. The server is unable to authenticate himself to the user or to yourself. Okay? So we need to be able to understand how to fix this moving forward. And of course, user authentication. The user must be able to authenticate himself to the server as well. One key point here is people still like phishing. Phishing has become a fantastic business. By the way, I'm going to be rich tomorrow. Okay? I just received an email. All I had to do was give $1,000, and I'm going to receive $1 million when he reaches the US. Fantastic. No, but in all honesty, people still like phishing a lot. Okay, we can see the numbers here. The number of unique phishing websites, we can see we're still up at 22,000 in September of last year. These emails are very well written. Sometimes it looks like the IT team is actually asking some of these end users to fill out some information and go ahead and authenticate against the corporate email system. Sometimes we're seeing scenarios where a bank is asking for information. So it's definitely a successful business, and look at the growth year to year. We can see that phishing is definitely doing well, and how do we protect our end users from these scenarios? That's what we're going to look at today. Which leads me to the question, are you still using passwords? This week has been fantastic. We have seen so many different sessions on how Microsoft is helping everyone to move away from passwords. The Windows 10 features have been fantastic. Have you guys been seeing some of these sessions about this? Yeah? Well, phishing and fraud. It's easy to grab passwords from unaware users. It's easy to perform fraudulent activities once you have access to these passwords. There's too many passwords for our end users. A lot of customers are still not taking advantage of technology such as ADFS, where you can provide single sign-on. A lot of times, these passwords, we're telling our users, hey, make them stronger, and therefore they start writing them down, becoming easy to hack. Just the other day, I actually found out that my little sister is actually using my password that I started using 2 years ago. And now I found out that if a hacker is able to grab my password, maybe my family is vulnerable as well. So of course now I've adjusted that, and that's not an issue. But of course there is definitely password fatigue still. And finally, the most important issue that I'm seeing on the net with my customers these days are the hashes of passwords. So these computers that are on the domain connected to the network, all our end users are accessing the internet. Again, vulnerable to phishing attacks. Malware can grab a hold of these computers. All of a sudden, you can have a scenario where attackers have access to your hash. They're able to take that hash and move laterally on the network. Once they're able to find a domain admin hash that's stored locally on these machines, they're able to potentially take over your domain controllers. Okay, this is a very common threat. It's called pass the hash. I'm sure you guys have seen this many times this week. We have solutions, especially moving forward in Windows 10, that prevent these types of attacks. When we're looking at authentication, it wasn't as simple as just machines anymore, these Windows desktops and our phones and devices. We're now talking about an IoT world, where we have the connected car and the medical industry leveraging devices must be able to authenticate. Right? So how do we actually have these devices perform stronger authentication? We can't just say, hey, go ahead and have multi-factor authentication. So we have to start thinking now, how do we authenticate these different devices? We have to think about, is cryptography potentially too slow for IoT? So these are other concepts that are going to be coming up over the next couple of years as well. Industrial sensors are really changing the way businesses make decisions now. They're able to grab data within their actual business, with these sensors, consolidate the data, centralize it, and make decisions based on that. So therefore, these sensors must be able to authenticate successfully as well. If not successfully authenticated, and we see some faulty data being brought up, that can implicate the business as well. In the IoT world, we start seeing that HTTP and HTTPS are not necessarily the most common protocol anymore. There may be new protocols coming out, and standard SSL and TLS may not help us in those scenarios. Non-repudiation. Non-repudiation is definitely another factor that we have to take into consideration when dealing with security. Okay? Many of our customers have this as a requirement now, where they need to prevent someone from denying that they created a document, prevent someone from saying that they did not send a specific document. When we look at a paper document, we know that someone can sign a document with their hand coming close to contact with the paper. Of course, there can be forgery. However, the human hand is the paper. In case of a digital document, there's machinery, We have our software keyboard between the human and the digital documents. So we need to be able to provide non-repudiation for that scenario as well. So how can organizations guarantee non-repudiation? We're going to look into that. Privacy. Of course, this is a very hot topic over the last couple of years. Again, thanks to NSA and Edward Snowden. We've seen many leaked documents where our privacy has been implicated. We thought we were making connections to a server where it was HTTPS, where it was encrypted, but now we've realized that, hey, we have to look at the full big picture, and maybe in the back end, some environments may be stored in clear text. So the overall view of privacy when dealing with public clouds is something we have to address. Of course, Edward Snowden did release many other documents that show, for example, the NSA may have connections with private corporations on having access to this specific data. So history shows that privacy challenges are not new. What I want to do is leverage this to try to get a different perspective of privacy and make you understand why we need to pay more attention to this and why we need to focus more on cryptography and encryption, etc. Okay? When we look back in history, maybe even thousands of years ago, we saw that doors and walls were tools that we used to prevent the invasion of privacy. When we wanted privacy, we would leverage these tools to allow us to be by ourselves. When we want to be away from people, we would go in our homes, close the doors, and we would have privacy. Obviously, as technology has matured, we have seen how this has been implicated. So over the years, we've seen a trend of this. We have seen how privacy challenges have occurred in the past. In the late 1800s, the first portable camera was invented. No longer did we require this tripod, a large machine with plates being slid inside and out to take pictures of people. People thought, hey, our privacy is being impacted. Our privacy is a concern now. In the late 1800s, towards 1890, we saw that the first portable camera was invented where we can actually slip it into our pocket, take it out, and take a picture of someone. Again, our privacy was implicated. A Harvard Law Review article came out that supported the public. The right to privacy came out, right? And a law was actually enforced. Then in the 1960s, laws were being passed, theories were being passed where we were saying, hey, privacy today in the 1960s was the ability to control data as it goes through different social communities. Of course, mainframes, clients and servers, and now where we are today, that no longer exists. Of course, in the world of mobility and cloud, it's very hard for individuals now to control their own data. And when I'm talking about data, I'm not talking about someone posting on Facebook, hey, I'm in the Maldives this weekend, and everyone knows that you're not at home. I'm not talking about someone tweeting something online either. What I'm talking about is specifically, how often do you log in? What times do you post? Even your homes are going to produce data of how often you're home or not. And then, of course, the connected car. So when are you actually using your car? That's the data that I'm talking about. Okay? Finally, before we let go of privacy, I wanted to bring up one more topic on privacy, which is observation changes behavior. When we look at the panopticon was the design of a prison where prisoners would be situated around in a cylinder-like shape, and the guard would be placed in the middle, in a tower in the middle, so that all prisoners can see the guard, and the guard can see all prisoners at the same time. What the prisoners didn't know was that when the guard was actually watching. So in this case here, we see that observation changes behavior because the prisoners were actually well-behaved or better behaved because they thought they were being watched at all times. This is actually being in use today. Here's a picture that I found. Of course, you can see here how all the prisoners can see the guard in the middle. But this really just strikes on the point where which is what I want to make, that observation changes behavior. If someone knows that they're under surveillance, will their behavior change? So with that said, let's deep dive. Encryption, why it's used, technologies used today. We're going to discuss that. Keys, symmetric, asymmetric. We're going to look at how we protect these specific private keys. We'll look at certificates and, again, applications. Okay? We'll start with theory. I'll show you some end-user views and give you a behind-the-scenes perspective as well with network captures. Now, I know everyone here is familiar with encryption at rest, encryption in transit. Some of the challenges quickly that have come up with these specific use is that algorithms are becoming weak. Computing power is increasing. The internet is designed without security in mind. End users want the ability to work on any device. So these have become challenges with encryption at rest and encryption in transit. And of course, finally, end users synchronize to public clouds without even thinking or knowing about it. So great. Encryption at rest. Encryption at rest is simply the ability to encrypt documents in a specific storage location. We know that BitLocker, EFS, SQLTD, these are technologies that do very well in what they're used for. But what happens if someone wants to send an email to someone else? What happens if someone moves a document location to a USB key? Then all of a sudden we lose the protection on that document. Encryption in transit. SSL and TLS have always helped us protect our credentials as we authenticate against a server. We know that the flow of data is protected. IPsec, OME, these are technologies that we use, again, between two computers on the network. Again, fantastic at what they do, but not addressing everything we need. So here's a situation that I see a lot of customers still using today. How to not protect your data. Does anyone here still see this? Yeah? So we're seeing someone just put in, for example, here we have a secret butter chicken recipe. Do not forward, this is confidential. Right? Definitely not a way that we want to leverage security. Okay? How do we protect this? How do we protect this kind of a document? So this is where protection and use comes into play, right? Even when this document is moving, when it's leaving your network via email, via USB key, we're able to protect it via protection in use. Okay? More of a bonus, we know that even if we share it with a partner, we're able to protect it. Even more of a bonus, we're able to protect it as it moves to the cloud. Okay? Many of our end users don't even know they're synchronizing private, confidential, corporate data to, for example, the iCloud, Dropbox, etc. Here are some data protection realities. Senior managers admit to regularly uploading these files to public clouds. 58% have accidentally sent information to the wrong person. I'm right now based out of Dubai, and we have a lot of Mohammeds where I'm based. So it's very easy to send a document to someone else by accident due to the naming issue of having so many Mohammeds and sometimes accidentally being sent in the cache. Came recently from I used to be at Dell as well, and at Dell and Microsoft, we have a similar name in our senior leadership. So both these companies had very important people with the same name, and sometimes they may accidentally deliver documents to each other. So how do we protect this? How do we protect our customers from these scenarios? Leveraging Azure RMS. RMS has been discussed in many different sessions, so please feel free to see the recordings on MSDN Channel 9. But however, I just want to quickly give you a quick overview that RMS allows you to protect the documents from birth to end of life. Right? We're able to see that from protection in rest, we're able to move that document and apply policy to it. We're able to protect it. We're able to encrypt it. So we're able to not only encrypt it, but also to provide permissions such as read-only. I can read it but not forward it. You can prevent someone from replying to people. You can also prevent from your actual email being modified as they reply or forward it. Is it perfect? No. I mean, someone can still take a snapshot of the screen with their camera. However, it does prevent printing and taking screenshots with your computer. It helps the honest people stay honest, helps the honest people from making mistakes. Risk analysis tells us that our data is most important. We cannot undo leaking our source code. We cannot take back an email that was leaked out by a former employee. So the ability to reason over data is definitely critical. Okay, great. It's very nice, but how is it done? So let's jump in a little deeper. The use of cryptography. The practice and study of techniques is what cryptography really is. It's the secure communication in the presence of adversaries, so in the presence of attackers. Modern cryptography is what allows us to take these very complex mathematical functions and combine that with electrical engineering such as smart cards, TPMs, HSM devices. So it's the intersection of these mathematical relations and the computer science, the software, and the electrical engineering. We discussed all these different security requirements. You understand all these topics: confidentiality, integrity, authentication, non-repudiation. So now while I describe to you how algorithms are used with keys to protect data, let me quickly start off with this basic legend. We see here that plain text is simply marked with this open envelope. It's human readable. Ciphertext with the locked envelope is ciphertext, not readable to the human. A key is just a random string, binary string, maybe a password, maybe a passphrase as well, that's input to an algorithm. Some of the crypto basics here: encryption is taking that plain text and moving it over to ciphertext. Decryption, of course, is taking that ciphertext and forming plain text. Okay? So when we're looking at symmetric and asymmetric keys, symmetric keys is when you have the same key that's used to encrypt data and also decrypt data. The problem with this is that if there's a man-in-the-middle attack, if someone's able to access that key, he's able to then decrypt it as well. So if someone is monitoring traffic over the network and he gets a hold of that key, he's then able to decrypt it. So it's definitely vulnerable. This is, however, a very fast encryption method, and therefore it's typically referred to as bulk encryption. Asymmetric keys consist of both a public key and a private key. That's why you have asymmetry. The private key is kept protected. The public key is widely distributed, typically via certificates. The private key is used to encrypt data. Then the public key is used to decrypt data, and vice versa, of course. I can't tell you how many times I've seen private keys held openly public, sometimes on C drives. After maybe an Exchange server was deployed, we have these front-end servers hosting OWA services, and boom, right there I see a certificate with a private key sitting on the C drive. These keys are meant to be private. That's why they're called private keys. Okay, so now let's jump into symmetric key encryption. We have plain text input, a message here that's meant to be kept encrypted. Something about Derrick Rose needs to be double teamed. Okay. Plain text input and a key is passed as input into encryption, into an encryption algorithm, and we generate ciphertext. Now, once we have the ciphertext, we then pass the ciphertext and the shared key to the decryption algorithm, the same algorithm, and we produce plain text output. That's the symmetry that we see here. The key here, again, is that it's the same key being used. An example of symmetric key encryption is when we protect a document and we encrypt a document and we send it off to the recipient. The recipient then receives the document and says, hey, in another email, you're going to receive the password. That's an example of symmetric encryption. They go ahead, receive the document, and use the same password to decrypt the document. We've seen some of these algorithms in the past. We've used DES, triple DES, RC4, RC5. AES is now the most widely used algorithm. At one point, when DES was seen as a vulnerable algorithm, there was actually a contest that was held by the NIST to identify a new encryption algorithm to be used. Okay? So the key point here is make sure that you're always on top of how secure your algorithms are. And we're going to see that more to see which algorithms are actually being used by your servers. However, this is something that definitely has to be maintained. Okay, when we look at asymmetric public key cryptography, again, like I said before, the public key is openly passed around. The private key remains secret. The advantages you get with public key crypto is that you now have the ability to create digital signatures and integrity, authentication, on top of confidentiality. With asymmetric public key encryption, let's go ahead and take this message. See some people laughing out there. This did come up again. Clear text input. Please deflate the balls to 11.5. We pass that input into an encryption algorithm with, this time, the recipient's public key. Because we know only the recipient has the private key to decrypt it. So we take that ciphertext and pass it through a decryption algorithm with the recipient's private key in order to get the clear text output. Clear? In this scenario, again, different keys, therefore we have asymmetry. The asymmetric algorithms are RSA, ECC, Diffie-Hellman. These are the most commonly used algorithms. Again, RSA is the algorithm I recommend. ECC, again, there are some advantages to leveraging ECC as well. But please do your diligence to see there's many crypto researchers, crypto analysts that are constantly finding ways on how to break these algorithms down and find vulnerabilities. So again, make sure you keep this well maintained. And of course, Microsoft will also release vulnerabilities as well. The advantages of public key crypto: increased security. The private keys never have to be transmitted, never have to be revealed to anyone. It provides non-repudiation. We get the increased convenience of leveraging a PKI now. Okay? So now when we have these public and private keys, anyone can generate these keys, but we need something to make sure that we can trust these keys, that tell someone, hey, we can trust this key because it's with this certificate, and this certificate was issued by a certificate authority. That's what allows us to trust a specific key that's in use. The private keys are protected by potentially Atali's HSM. An HSM is something that provides additional security for your certificate authority's private keys, maybe your RMS server's private keys that you want to keep secure that nobody else should have access to. Okay? Even your own administrator, maybe you won't trust to have access to this, and therefore you want to pull it off the Windows server and throw it onto the special device. Your end users have private keys, and therefore you want to leverage TPMs or maybe even smart cards to provide additional protection. Like I said before, the advantages of secret keys is that it's faster than public and private key pairs. So therefore, we like to use them both together in order to perform what they're good at, basically, okay? So if we look at this real-world scenario where we have a message we want to encrypt, someone did laugh, that's good, where we have this message we want to protect, we encrypt this message with symmetric encryption because AES is a fast encryption algorithm. It leverages a session key to encrypt a large amount of data. So this session key is used as an input to this algorithm. And now how do we get that session key over to the recipient side? That's where we take the public key of the recipient and we encrypt the session key with it. So now we're leveraging an RSA encryption algorithm to protect the symmetric key. So we have a digital envelope formed along with the encryption from the symmetric key that's passed along to the recipient. And of course, this process is repeated for all recipients that require this message. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at a network capture. We're able to jump in a little deeper and see through network captures the version of TLS that's used, the key exchange that's used, and of course, here's what it looks like via network, a netmon trace, where the client is actually able to generate the session key and, again, encrypt it using the public key. Okay, so I'm going to dive a bit deeper into this so you guys understand everything that's happening with this handshake. Okay, so let's look at authenticity. We said that this public key, private key pair allows us to perform authenticity as well. So we know that the private key is kept private with a user, and therefore, if he's the only one with access to this key, we leverage that to encrypt something to say that, hey, I am the only person that was capable of encrypting this message. So in this scenario here, we have that message that we want to encrypt. We use now the sender's private key to take that input, pass it through the encryption algorithm, and generate ciphertext. We're then able to take, now the recipient side receives the encrypted message, and he has the sender's public key via certificate, and he's able to decrypt it and read the plain text, and therefore he knows that only that sender was able to send that message. Let's take a look at integrity. Everybody with me still? Great. So what is hashing? Hashing is basically the process of taking a large amount of data and making it smaller. We use it so that we can uniquely identify a stream of data, and it has to be a one-way function, meaning that if you have a specific hash, you can't go back and say, hey, based on this hash, I know it says something else. It says something specifically, okay? So it has to be something that's a one-way function. We take a stream of data, pass it through an algorithm, and we get a single output. It must also be very fast. Hashing algorithms, again, like encryption algorithms, can be broken. We've seen in the past MD4 and MD5 were widely used, and these became vulnerable to attacks. The Flame was a popular attack that was used as well. SHA-1 is widely used today. It's probably familiar to many of you. There's actually right now a deprecation policy from Microsoft that's saying remove SHA-1 from your environments and leverage SHA-2 and SHA-3. Okay? So when we look at this, this hashing algorithm, typically what we see is that a message is first encrypted, and then once it's encrypted, we provide the hash of it. Okay? In an ideal world, there wouldn't be a case where two different inputs would provide the same output. In that case, we would have something called a collision. So let's look into this in detail. If Alice wants to send an order to Bob to make sure that it's not altered, we produce this order file, and we produce a digest. This digest is created from passing this order through a hashing algorithm. And then we take this digest and send it along with the original order to Bob. So Bob receives the order, and wants to verify it. So Bob has the hash, or the digest, and the original file. He passes the original file through the hash algorithm because the hash algorithm is known. So now he has his own digest. If the two digests don't match, then we know it's been altered. But if the two digests do match, we know it hasn't been altered. A digital signature. A digital signature is basically now identification to the recipient of saying, hey, a message has been signed via digital signature, right? So integrity, of course, is included within a digital signature. And finally, we get non-repudiation with public key crypto because we know that if someone signs a document with his private key and it's been kept private, we can now allow for non-repudiation. So let's look at this process in full. Here's a flow that shows how a digital signature is actually formed. For example, this is how SMIME is used as well. We have a hash that's created once we pass the data through a hash function. We then take that hash and encrypt it using a private key. So we know now that we're able to authenticate that user with his private key, and we have a hash now that's also produced to validate the integrity of the document. So now that's how we have a digitally signed document. When we look at hashes, we want to make sure that, of course, it has to be a one-way output, but we also want to make sure that a small change to the input doesn't result in a small change in the hash as well, because then we could be vulnerable to a proximity attack. So if we see that if we change, for example, here's an input string of Microsoft with a capital, and we see the output hash. If we change the capital M to a lowercase m, we're able to see that there's a significant change in the hash. Okay, so if someone's trying to guess passwords on the network with hashes, we know that it's not possible because there's a significant change in the hash. Okay? So let's look at some applications of this. We know that when credentials are challenged, we know databases store passwords in hashes. Okay, of course, they're not stored in clear text. Active Directory, for example, stores its passwords in hashes. SharePoint with SQL, again, typically will have these passwords in a hash format. Azure Sync. Everyone now is leveraging the cloud for many services. One of the key points here in moving to the cloud is that you need to leverage directory sync. Sometimes people are using ADFS for single sign-on. Sometimes people are using password sync. When we're leveraging password sync, some people are saying, hey, I don't trust moving our passwords to the cloud. Well, in Azure AD Sync, we're actually taking a hash of your hash. So therefore, there's a double hashed password stored in Microsoft's data center. We spoke about it already. Of course, these hashing algorithms, again, have to be maintained very well. SHA-1 currently has a deprecation policy. Please move off of it to SHA-2, SHA, or stronger algorithm, okay? So let's put it all together now. We've seen SSL. SSL is, of course, where I'd like to go first because that's a very well-used protocol. These cipher suites, if we look into the network monitor to see the trace between a client and server, we're able to see these cipher suites that are offered in the SSL handshake. I know you guys have seen the SSL handshake frequently or often, so I won't go into detail about that. But here's something that I haven't seen broken down very well in the past. So when we see this long list of cipher suites, we know that it's a lot of data, but what does it really mean, right? So when we go back here and we look at this, the protocol is, of course, SSL or TLS. SSL has now changed into TLS, and TLS is constantly being modified to make it more secure. There's different key exchanges. We talked about RSA. We talked about Diffie-Hellman. There's many other public-private key encryption algorithms that can be used. The cipher encryption is the shared key is the symmetric key encryption that's used, typically for the bulk encryption. There's a hash as well that's produced. Cipher type and cipher mode, that's just basically saying how is the encryption going to be performed by block, by stream, how the data is actually broken up before it's fed into the cipher encryption. Okay? Digital signature, that's again taking your private key and forming that signature with a hash. Okay, so now we know how all these functions are, what they all mean. Let's take a look at this in a Windows perspective. Whenever we're dealing with Windows and these specific algorithms in TLS, we can see here that there's something that we leverage called the S channel. You've probably seen this in the event log many times and kind of wondered, what is the S channel? The S channel basically leverages these algorithms and says, here are the algorithms that we can use to protect your data. Okay? Other apps have something similar. If you're a developer, you're probably familiar with OpenSSL, etc. We always have advancements in this. We know that there's vulnerabilities, so sometimes we change the order. For example, Windows 8.1 and 2012 R2, we're now using different cipher modes. What I recommend you to do in your own environment is to look at what you have in your S channel, look at the order you have, confirm that it's the order that you want, make sure that you believe that these algorithms are secure, the key lengths are strong, and take out the ones that you believe may be vulnerable. Okay, and of course, like I said before, Microsoft will always provide updates where we can actually provide new algorithms that will go into your order within the S channel. Okay, so if we break it down, if we look at an actual communication between a client and server via Netmon, this is what it looks like, right? So we can see in the first example here, we're using TLS as the protocol, Diffie-Hellman as the key exchange, so it could be RSA as well, but in this scenario here, it's Diffie-Hellman. The signature, we're using RSA. Again, the private key that's going to sign the document. So we can actually have the key exchange done by one algorithm. We could have a signature done by another algorithm. The cipher, which is the block encryption, or sorry, the bulk encryption, is with AES here. The size is 128 bits. The mode is CBC, which is blockchaining. And the digest is SHA-256. Okay? So that shows basically an overview of the suites, of the crypto suites, okay? Of the cipher suites, sorry. If we look at our S channel on our servers to see what we support, we can modify that via GPO. We can control what we're allowing our servers to use in TLS. If you don't want to go to that level of GPOs or even the registry for a single server, then you can use a tool called IIS Crypto. It's a GUI that's, I found, a very helpful tool that allows you to see which algorithms are going to be used, which ones you can enable, etc. So best practices. Definitely recommend removing RC4. Definitely recommend reordering the crypto suites as you see necessary. Update your servers to 2012 R2, because when you're dealing with your legacy servers, they may not have all your cipher suites ordered correctly in terms of what's secure today. And again, do your research, of course, on ECC versus RSA. So let's look at the SSL handshake. Whenever a client wants to contact a server, the client says hello. The server then responds with a certificate. The client then responds with, OK, I have your public key. Let's go ahead and start encryption. And what it does is now it exchanges to say, here are all of the cipher suites that I support. The server says, OK, I support all of these. I'm going to pick one on the top of your list, from your list. And then they're able to establish that encrypted session. So we talked about public keys and private keys. Let's go on to certificates. Okay? And digital certificates basically provides the ability to bind this public key to the user or to the object that has the private key. Of course, it could be a user, computer, or a service, and it can be issued by a CA, and it should be issued by a CA, and therefore that's why CAs are kept very securely, for example, offline, because if it's not protected, your CA, then there can be severe impersonation. So in this example here, I'm stating that, hey, these certificates must be signed, and therefore a hash and encryption via the certificate authority's private key is produced with this digital certificate. These certificates are placed in an X509 format. That's specifically with Microsoft Certificate Authority, with our ADCS PKI. And of course, the digital certificate has a collection of attributes that we're going to look into, a few of them right now. Okay, we can see there's a subject. Here, the name of this resource, this user is Majid. The issuer's identity, the certificate authority. We have the public key. So when you create your certificate request, you're actually generating your public-private key pair right there and then. And we're passing the public key to be validated and created within this certificate. The serial number is generated within the certificate authority, and a validity period is created as well. We're able to see why this certificate is being used for, what purposes does it have, and that's typically stored in the extensions. And finally, that certificate should be signed by a certificate authority. Let's look at the PKI. So what is a PKI? The PKI basically is what manages how users and network devices are given access to company data, company information, providing those main features that we discussed. Microsoft's version of the PKI is ADCS, and of course, that provides components that work together to provide that public key-based security. Okay, so a CA verifies the identity of a certificate request, and based on that, he's able to issue a certificate. We typically want strong assurance, so when a certificate is produced, we want to make sure that that certificate authority only gives it out securely. So for example, we see a lot where we're there for maybe an Exchange project, a Link project, a SharePoint project. Someone says, hey, we have a prerequisite for a certificate. Can you just deploy me a quick PKI, quick CA? That's definitely not providing strong assurance. Okay? We definitely don't want to just pop up these CAs on your network, because now you're vulnerable to attacks on your network. Someone's able to maybe generate a certificate, use it to set up a server, and collect passwords. Just at a random example. So just make sure that when you're dealing with certificate authorities, they're well maintained, they're well governed. Another reason for CAs is because you want to issue a high volume of certificates. Of course, certificate management becomes very important, as we talked about. The ability to issue certificates via templates. You're able to now automatically distribute certificates to end users, whether maybe they need it for a web server, they need to maybe fill out some specific information that you document within a template. The ability to manage certificate revocation is very important within a PKI as well. You need to be able to keep these CRLs published for the users' computers on the network so that they can see if this certificate has been revoked or not. CRLs can be updated manually and, of course, automatically as well. So how does a computer validate the trust? Here's a very old snapshot, by the way, of a trusted root certificate authority folder. You guys have definitely seen this before. In Windows, we see that any certificate authority that's trusted by default is kept within this folder. This is in the web browser as well. It tells the web browser which certificate authority should we trust for certificates that are issued. If the root certificate authority is not within this folder, then it won't be trusted by this computer. We can open up these certificates, look at them, see the validity, who they've been issued by. Typically, the root CA is, of course, self-signed, so it's issued by itself. We can see the serial number, we can see the hash, we can see what algorithms are being used. The path of trust. Understanding this will prevent you from having those server authentication issues, having those certificate warning pop-ups. Understanding this is essential. So each of these certificates must be validated. It must be validated for the time of validity, for the lifetime. Each of them, all the way up to the root, must be validated as well. Sometimes a root CA, if it's installed by yourself, the root CA must be deployed by yourself via GPO, for example, within Active Directory. However, sometimes end users want to leverage a computer that's not joined to the domain, and therefore we go to third-party CAs, and we must validate that they're actually in the path of trust as well, that their certificate authority is in your trusted root certificate authority store. Okay? So how do applications check the certificate status? They go through many different checks. First of all, we have to verify that signatures from end entity to the root certificate. Okay? The root certificate must be trusted, the certificate must be time valid, and we also need to make sure that certificates containing unknown critical extensions must be rejected as well. Okay, so developers have to look out for these specific items when creating their certificate check functions. And here's an example of how we see the trust being formed. We know that the public key must be used going up the chain to validate that the specific private key was used to sign it. And that's how we form that chain of trust. Okay? A lot of times I get asked the question of how long should certificates be used for? How large should our key be? How long should our certificate authority have a certificate valid for? When we're looking at designing a certificate authority hierarchy, I always recommend keeping the certificate of the leaf node of your actual computer as small as possible, therefore limiting the ability of that certificate being vulnerable due to maybe some algorithms being deemed vulnerable. So therefore, I like to keep it as small as possible, let's say 2 years. If that leaf node is kept for 2 years, then we know that that issuing CA should have a minimum of 4 years. Because after that 2-year mark, he's now hitting the point where if that issuing CA wants to issue a certificate, he won't be able to meet that 2-year requirement. So therefore, we recommend a validity time of 4 years. The keynote here on the root CA and the issuing CA is that 4 years is a long time. 8 years is definitely a long time. A lot of times we see that the governance is not in place, the management of the CA is not in place, and therefore, if someone leaves their job after 4 years and the certificate expires, how do they go back and go through that renewal process? Okay, so definitely keep that into your maintenance plan and your governance of the CA. Okay? So renewing the issuing CA should be then at a 2-year mark. Every 2 years, the certificate should be renewed. And again, same thing with your root CA, that after 4 years, it should be renewed as well. Okay? Keeping that certificate authority secured offline should definitely be in your practice. So that root CA that's available for 8 years and that private key that goes along with that should be locked up. It should be kept offline. Because if someone gets access to that private key, he's basically God for your network. He's able to produce private keys as needed. He's able to decrypt, of course, all your data as he wishes. So, of course, that private key must be kept secure, sometimes on an HSM device as well. And then we can see that the renewal of the certificate can continue as expected. Okay? So SMIME. SMIME, of course, is a very important application that's not used, I feel, enough. We talked about RMS. We talked about, you've probably seen OME being used for Office 365 users. SMIME is also being now leveraged within Office 365. We see email encryption as an example where SMIME can be used. You, of course, need your public key to be brought from your recipient, so that public key needs to be obtained. And then after that, we're able then to go ahead and we're able to encrypt the document, encrypt the message with the recipient's public key, and therefore go ahead and send the message so that user can go ahead and decrypt it with his private key. Email signature, of course, again, is the same way. You always have the ability to produce an email signature. Okay? So at this point now in SMIME, you can use your private key, sign an email, go ahead and send that off, and that's a good way of saying, here's my public key, you have my certificate, go ahead now and send me something, okay? This, again, is something not used enough and should be leveraged more often. Okay? Any questions about S-MIME? Okay. So that's it for the content, guys. I know it's Friday afternoon. I wanted to stop a little early. I'm going to go into some demos quickly. Yeah, sure, go ahead. Just use the microphone here.
You had mentioned that the SHA-1 is kind of coming to the end of life.
Yes.
Do you know when it's going to be end of life, and what happens to those machines who have the SHA-1 certificates installed on them? How do we issue? Do we have to build new CAs to issue the SHA-2 certificates, or how does that work?
What I've recommended in the past is actually to build a new CA in terms of if you have scenarios where you're unsure of the compatibility. Okay? So when we're looking at scenarios where you need to test SHA-2 compatibility, I recommend definitely having a secondary CA to be installed, deployed, and therefore you can have the SHA-2 certificates leveraged for testing. That's something that can be used. However, you can just reissue a new certificate leveraging SHA-2 encryption.
Using
SHA-2
the same
sign.
CA?
Sorry, what?
Using the same CA?
Using the same CA, absolutely.
Okay. And can two CAs coexist in the same?
Two certificate authorities can coexist at the same time.
Okay.
So you can have them in parallel. There's no problem with that.
All right.
Okay.
How does an issuing CA differ from the CA itself?
Sorry, say it again?
The issuing, you said there is the root CA and there is the issuing CA. What's the difference?
So the root CA is typically we recommend a root CA so that self-signed certificate is kept secured, because that's the only issue where you should have a self-signed certificate. The issuing CA is something typically we build a hierarchy. We have a sub-CA underneath the root CA, and he's typically the CA that is able to issue certificates to all your computers and users on the network. So you'll see it in the path of trust, your root certificate, your subordinate CA that issues all the certificates. Go ahead. So guys, we'll go into questions now. I know it's Friday afternoon. Everyone has to catch their shuttles. So we can end the session now, and let's go ahead and jump into questions.
Does OAuth has some special certificate requirements?
OAuth?
No, OAuth, yes.
OWA?
No, OAuth.
I mean, OAuth is typically using something like ADFS, where you won't have any kind of specific certificate requirements other than what's leveraged by ADFS. So as long as your ADFS your federation server is configured properly, then you can go ahead and leverage the certificate that's being used. So OAuth, not necessarily. I think what you mean from an extension, you mean? I haven't seen any.
Yeah, let's say I have multiple servers behind a load balancer. And I read that OAuth requires a separate thumbnail for each server certificate. So can I use the same certificate with multiple SANs for all those servers and still use OAuth?
So in the scenarios where I've used OAuth, yes, I have been able to use the same certificates. So it hasn't been an issue. I've used OAuth, for example, with mobile devices connecting for RMFs. That's a scenario where we've leveraged the same certificate. Okay, maybe your scenario is a little different, but it hasn't been an issue in my scenarios that I've used it.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions, guys?
One more question.
Yep.
When you're using certificate enrollment services, you go to the website, you have templates. Can you force email attributes on any of the templates when you're using the enrollment web services?
So when you're using automatic enrollment?
Yes.
With a template?
Normally you have the common name that's of course enforced, but can you enforce any other attributes from a template?
I'm just thinking, what kind of attributes are you saying? Are you saying it has to be a check that's done?
Yes, depending on how you do it. You either use Active Directory and you get that from AD, but if you're using a web server certificate and you want to get notifications, in 2012 PowerShell will allow you to do that, but how can you force an email to be added to that request?
I'm not sure. Let's quickly talk about that
Sure.
up front. I'm
Thank you.
not sure. Yeah, no problem.
Hi. If you've had a root CA and an issuing CA basically serving the same function and they've distributed certificates out to servers, if that root CA certificate is set to expire and you renew it, do you then have to issue new certificates to the clients that you've issued certificates to already?
If the root CA certificate expires, I mean, as long as that certificate is still valid,
Right.
and the other certificates are still valid, then you're fine. You can just go ahead with the renewal process. There's no need to actually renew all the end user certificates or the computer certificates below.
So if they were like web server certificates and a user would hit the browser and the date would be actually in the past, they wouldn't get a invalid certificate message on their browser?
So if the root CA certificate was expired, absolutely.
Right.
But we wouldn't have to reissue the web server certificate.
You wouldn't have to?
No.
Okay.
But however, of course, you would have your trust broken if your root CA was expired.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
If you have a root CA with a validity period of 12 years and an intermediate set to 6 years, is there any other maintenance that you would suggest that you have to do, prior to that? Anything like publishing CRLs or anything like that?
I mean, CRLs is something that I typically separate that from the certificate authority maintenance. So CRL maintenance is definitely something that you need to keep separate. So for example, as soon as a certificate gets revoked, you want to make sure that that revocation has been passed down to all the computers on the network that needs to know about it. So CRL maintenance is definitely one separate activity than the actual CA certificate maintenance.
Right.
Okay, so the CA certificate maintenance, I mean, 12 years is definitely a long time. I always recommend renewing that certificate in a shorter period so that you don't have the issue come up one last second, so you don't have to deal with it criteria.
Right.
So definitely keeping it as small as possible, keeping documented processes so you know how to renew it, and of course having that CA offline protected in a physical safe or something like that.
Right, and if you have obviously the root CA is not issuing certificates. So aside from that, and I understand what you just mentioned, where you recommend republishing that certificate. But aside from that, there's no other maintenance then for the root CA.
No. It depends. You can also leverage an HSM. So there may be, a formal process on actually going through renewing a CA certificate. For example, when you go through a CA renewal, it shouldn't just be the administrator. It should be other people involved, because it shouldn't just be one person that has the keys to the kingdom, for example. Okay, so it should be something more formalized and something that's taken into some serious consideration on how you go about doing those types of activities.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. No problem. Go ahead.
I know you said you were going to come back to, I think it was this gentleman here. He was asking a question, and I want to understand what he was saying. What he's saying that if you make a request, that you get an email to say that a request was made. Is that what you're trying to say? Okay. All right. Never mind.
Regarding CA retirement, what would you say would be like the top bullet points in retiring CAs? Let's say somebody stood up CA accidentally in your environment because they added themselves to the wrong admin group and didn't know what they were doing. I'm not talking about me, of course. Yeah. Well, it really wasn't me in this case, but none of you have to believe me. It doesn't matter. Yeah, there's a lot of documentation out there on retiring CAs. Can you just quickly give a couple bullet points, like turn off the issuing and
Absolutely.
at least to stop the bleeding right away? And how would you go through some of the list of certificates to validate whether or not it'll automatically renew or versus?
The first thing I would look at is identifying what damage has been done, what certificates have been issued by this rogue CA. So once you identify all those certificates, you've got to identify how can I get proper certificates issued from a proper CA, right? The well-maintained CA. So once you're able to replace those certificates, then you can go ahead and start seeing how you can decommission it. Okay, so taking off the CRL, taking off removing the root CA from Active Directory. That's just through the standard decommissioning process. So the most important thing is to see what certificates have been issued. You can use a command line like certutil, or you can actually go into the GUI of the certificate authority and see what certificates have been issued. That's the most critical step that you have to see, because you don't want to impact something that may be in production on your network. Okay, so that's... Go ahead.
You started leading into bringing external machines on using your self-signed cert, but then you could have for the root, you could have a third party, or a third, like a.
So you can
GoDaddy, whatever.
Yeah, I mean, so there are companies that have an issuing CA that was issued by a root CA. So MSIT actually had that set up. I'm not sure if we have that still. But that's typically not realistic for most of our customers, because that is a very expensive process that you have to go through. You have to go through a significant audit to receive a authority certificate from someone like GoDaddy. So typically not realistic. You would typically just have certificates issued by CA so that they're automatically within the Windows machines, these mobile devices.
So how do you go about doing that?
By having a certificate issued by a third-party CA?
Oh, okay. So you have to have another certificate of authority system?
No, I mean, you wouldn't leverage your own CA in that example. You would just go directly to their website. You would contact them and say, what's your process to receive a certificate from these third-party CAs? Like VeriSign, Symantec, right?
Okay, so you would still use a private for your root CA?
So your root CA wouldn't be used in this scenario.
Oh, okay.
So you would have their certificate authorities being used to issue certificates.
Ouch. Okay, thanks.
Okay, no problem. So you can do that. You can stand up your own intermediate CA with a third-party root CA, but that's a very expensive process to go through it, and it's typically not done with most companies. It would be a very large corporation that would actually see the benefit of having that large cost.
Well, I know the cost.
Yeah.
The cost is the issue.
Exactly.
If you're going to go that route,
Mm-hmm.
isn't that the process you CA and then issue?
Well, in this process here, you would just get the root CA, which is some third-party CA, to issue you a certificate so that you can build your subordinate CA. Yeah. Go ahead.
I love that Windows Hello, and I'm wondering if my CA need to be prepared somehow to issue certificate for that. Hello.
Sorry, you're speaking very low. Can you increase?
Okay. I love that Windows Hello, and I'm wondering if my CA need to be prepared somehow and a new template or whatever.
So I haven't looked into the details of Windows Hello yet, but I do know that it involves a PKI within ours, leveraging ADCS. The specific certificates that it uses, I'm not familiar with yet. However, it may just be a user authentication certificate, maybe a computer authentication certificate. It's probably something within the standard templates that are already provided. So once that template is created within the guidelines of setting up Windows Hello, then you'll be able to go ahead and issue that certificate from your CA. So I don't think it's going to be anything too complex from a PKI perspective. So it's just making sure that those certificates are available via a specific template. Okay. Go ahead.
So we are that company that uses third-party CAs for everything, certificates, and we can't do it anymore for private domain. They're not issuing them anymore, right? So We stood up, we had an internal CA that we were using, putting it on our application servers, everything, that's fine. The one I'm worried about is our domain controllers. Because right now our domain controllers have third-party certificates on them. And basically, as they were built, they got the certificate, so all their certificate dates are, they're not the same date, right, when they expire. And so now I'm going to have to put internal certificates on them. Is there anything I have to worry about? Do I have to do them all at the same time, or?
The good thing about domain controllers and Microsoft's PKI via ADCS is that they automatically receive the certificates once you have your first PKI. So they'll automatically install those certificates as soon as you have ADCS laid out in your design, if you follow the standard process of deploying the certificate authority.
Okay.
Okay.
Cool. Thanks.
No problem. So device guard, I think, is like Windows 10. Windows 10 Hello, where it's able to leverage certificates from ADCS, Microsoft's PKI. I don't know the specific requirements around device guard as of yet. Okay. Go ahead.
I just have a quick question about that specialty device that you said you can put your PKI infrastructure on. A couple companies, one company, what is that?
The HSM?
HSM, sure.
Yeah, so the HSM stands for Hardware Security Module. We leverage that to protect the private key. It's typically from vendors such as Tally's. I'm not thinking of any others.
Any of that stuff in your slides?
What's that?
Any of that stuff in your slides?
I do have a picture of a Tally's HSM. Yes, I mean the vendor is
the
actually.
vendor's on there? Great.
Yeah, and you could look up HSM and you'll see all the major
Really?
vendors.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
If you have a PKI infrastructure in place, is there an easy way to, like, you can build a secondary intermediate signing, but if you're already using that in place, can you build a larger one over it and make your CA, right now we have a small environment and our CA is our signing CA. Is there a way to make our root CA and our signing CA, split those apart and move that up to the CA?
So you're flexible in terms of you can actually grow your hierarchy, but it doesn't make sense to make your current issuing CA the root CA. I mean,
it is now.
Yeah.
Both functions. But
so,
is there a way to
what
move,
I'm saying? Yeah.
to move, or you just create a newer one and give that one a certificate and just keep everything flowing down?
Exactly. I would build a new issuing CA, keep that as a self-signed root CA, build your new issuing CA, move all your certificates there, issue all the new certificates with the proper templates, and then go ahead, and now you have your hierarchy built.
Got it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good.
Okay, I'm going to take a stab at asking, I think, a similar question to what some of these other guys were asking. I'm coming from a university, so we have a lot of students, employees, faculty with their own devices that they want to bring onto our campus and use. And in some cases, we want to be able to manage them. So we don't have ADCS at this point. We use third-party certificates for our web servers and whatnot. But some services like SCCM, if we were to manage non-university-owned devices, we'd need to use certificates for them, as I understand it. So normally, I guess, in a corporation, you'd stand up an ADCS and issue your own certificates. But what should we do in our case? These are not our own devices; they're BYOD. Any thoughts on that?
It typically depends on how you manage these devices, meaning that would it be acceptable for someone to come in and get a certificate? Would they be on the network long enough for you to push it out? Would you have to use an MDM device to maybe push out the certificate? Because if your goal is to authenticate that device by a certificate, you have to get it there somehow. Whether it's by the MDM, whether it's done manually, you need to be able to push that certificate out to the device. So how you get it there, there's many different options. Once it's on that device, you're then able to make sure that, hey, the servers it's connecting to needs to be able to validate that certificate's validity, revocation, etc. So those are the thought processes you have to go through now to make sure that those devices are being managed properly.
I guess I mean, it'd be nice if we could use some kind of solution that uses the existing third-party certificate authorities that are out there. You mentioned that it's quite expensive to get a secondary certificate authority signed by a third party.
No, in this scenario, it wouldn't apply. In this scenario, you would be able to leverage, the ADCS infrastructure to go ahead and push certificates to these devices, but it would be, manually. It wouldn't be like you would on any computer on the network, on the domain. So it would be on a different fashion. You would need to make sure that these certificates are provided differently. However, now the challenge you're probably having is when they connect to your server and it needs to validate the server certificate so that it's trusted. That's probably another route that you need to go to make sure that these mobile devices have your certificate authorities certificates on those devices as well. So that's something that you have to think about depending on the different scenarios that you want to enable with these mobile devices.
Can't quite hear you.
Thank you very much, everyone. Hope you enjoyed Ignite.